the show. Welcome everyone into Sunday Live. That is the new Queer Blues single I'm working on. We just got the acoustic guitar recorded on that. That's a very, very rough mix. And that will be the next Queer Blues single come probably November. Because as you guys know, I have a couple other band projects that I'm working on. Audio Terrorist, which a band I've had since high school in 1984, releasing a 12-inch club remix of the single The City. That should be hitting the global distribution on September 4th. The album version is on the album Who Are You? That was released back in October. And plenty more songs coming from Audio Terrorist in the coming year. And last but not least, the Caleb solo project, Rise Up, is finally got a final version that will be the official version, and that will also be coming out globally in September. But as always, you can go to Bandcamp for any of the bands, whether it's Caleb or Queer Blue or Audio Terrorist, and you can hear the demos, you can hear early mixes as we're working towards the final mix before release. Thank you to my patrons who have become members and subscribed to my Bandcamp pages. Greatly appreciated. The chat room is up and running, and I see people are posting, and it's all synchronized. It looks like this week the technology is going to be nice on us. So far, we haven't had any audio or video or sync problems, so fingers crossed on that one. Let's see. There was one other piece of news, just that the other acoustic Caleb tracks are coming along. We decided to put out the Rise Up track, which is a rock and roll track. We have about 4 different acoustic folk versions of Caleb's songs that are being worked on as well. So stay tuned for those release announcements coming up. Today, our guest is Peter Miller, artist, sound designer, and filmmaker. Peter has worked on a number of major films, has taught all of these arts, and is also a gallery artist, creating spaces and environments where people can, well, I'm going to just bring him right on and have him explain what he does. Yep. Now I need to unmute, folks. Let's see here. Joe's muted. Hey, Peter. How the heck are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing good. So what time is it there in Australia?
We've just gone 10 a.m. So we're in the future. It's Monday here, so 10 a.m. on Monday.
Is that the national slogan, Australia, the land of the future?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I wish it was. At the moment, it's the land of the past, I think. We're struggling with some problems with the whole COVID thing. So,
yeah, it's tricky because you're a large area with small, dense populations. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Australia, the landmass of Australia is around the size of the US, but our population is really mostly on the East Coast. So we have the main 3 big cities on the East Coast: Melbourne and Sydney and Brisbane. And that's where most of our population is. But then, then there are country areas on the east side, and there are country areas on the west, and some up to the Northern Territory as well. But not a lot in the middle.
Yeah. In the outback.
Yep.
Is that term still used?
Oh, sure. Yeah. We call it the outback. That's exactly what we call it.
I was wondering whether or not it was considered outback as the East Coast was getting settled, and more as it gets developed, or I don't know, kind of became a greater part of the Australian consciousness, if that term is still the term, or if there's a new term. Like, in the United States, we're going through a lot of transitions with old legacy colonial terms and changing those around into new terms. So.
No, we still call it the outback. I mean, I don't know. It was really hard to actually tell where the boundary is, where something becomes the outback. There are certain places where you're definitely in the outback, but it's a little hard to make a boundary for it. But yeah, certainly in the centre, you'd call that the outback for sure. And some of the big areas in kind of inland Queensland, where the big cattle stations are, stuff there, that would all be considered the outback.
And also along those lines, I was wondering what triggered that question in my mind there. I was reading something the other day that Ayers Rock is now getting more known more by its native name.
It's known pretty much exclusively here as Uluru, which is the native name for it. It's not. I don't think many people would call it Ayers Rock anymore. It's certainly not officially recognised as that anymore.
Got it. Well, I kind of derailed us into Australian history there and topography, but art.
Yes.
I was preparing this show, and I know you as a 3D visual artist, gallery show artist, and I read in your bio that you'd worked on some films and that you worked with some bands, stuff that folks would have heard of, Crowded House, INXS, on your little bio blurb. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, yeah, I've had a long and colourful career. I started, out in the film industry very young. I was an 18-year-old when I went to film school, and I came out of film school and started up I worked a little bit in the industry, but then I started up a company with a director called Alex Proyas, who is probably well known to a lot of people. And for very many years, for nearly a decade, we made music clips and commercials. But we worked with a lot of the fairly big Australian bands and a few big overseas bands as well, making music clips, because it was kind of the golden age of music video at that time. So it's mid 1980s to the mid 1990s. So yeah, we did a lot of that. And I actually graduated from film school with my degree in sound, but I got kind of sidetracked because once we went into that area, we were, the music is always obviously comes with the band, so there wasn't a lot for me to do. So I ended up being an art director for that, pretty much for that entire 10 years. And then as we transitioned across into doing more commercial work, I sort of started doing more music and more sound stuff, because I'm a musician as well. So so for very many years I was art director, and then I transitioned into that, and then I had my own company, which was mostly music for commercials and film. And then after that, I started kind of really just transitioning into sound design, which was the thing that I was trained for in the beginning. But it was many years afterwards that I started doing that. And then I worked on quite a number of feature films and documentaries through that period. But all the way through, I've also been interested in the visual art side of things as well. So that's been a continual interest through that entire period for me as well. So I've kind of had my fingers in very many pies.
And you talked about the film industry early on, but when you mentioned Rango and Mad Max Fury Road, those are recent films, so you're still connected to that industry.
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, the world has changed a lot for us in the film business, not just down here in Australia, but kind of globally. So the cinema industry itself has changed considerably, as I'm sure you're aware. I tend not to do as much of that work anymore, but it still, arises. So I do some of that from time to time. I also teach a bit now, which is something that I've just started doing the last sort of 5 or 6 years, which I enjoy very much. And I still continue to do sound work and music work on films when they come by. They just don't come by quite as often. Right now, at the moment, it's disastrous for us because the whole COVID thing has more or less kind of shut down our film industry. So it's been pretty hard for most people working in the business here. So I have other things that I can do, which is kind of lucky. But for a lot of people, it's become quite hard work to try and, to maintain their careers. And so we're all just waiting to see how that's going to turn out.
When I arrived in Seattle, I started taking on bands to consult with, get them up to speed on the music business. And I just had one band sign on about 3 weeks ago who were doing well, and they had real momentum before the shutdown. But everybody else, it was over like in a week.
Yeah.
So,
well, the arts has been really, really hard with this because, obviously we're not considered to be an essential service. So we, our government has been pretty good supporting workers and people out of work and stuff like that. But the arts and entertainment industry, not so much, because, people can get by without us apparently. So we don't qualify for a lot of that kind of help.
Turn off all the movies, all the music, and see how well society does.
Yeah.
But somehow the arts aren't considered essential, except for the fact that they're treated as essential every single day.
Yeah, it's the thing. It's the thing that's keeping everyone going, but it's not essential.
Right. That's I think just been a perpetual theme. If you look back in art history, I remember doing a year of art history between my bachelor's, because I came from a clinical psychology degree into multimedia. So I had to take a year off and take art history. And funny thing, in those art history books, they didn't mention anything about the politicians of the time, the great leaders of the time. It was all about the art, and you realize that that's how we're remembering those societies, is through the monuments, through the paintings, sometimes through the music, through the plays and the literature. So it always strikes me as really odd that this argument of the arts are secondary.
Yeah. Well, look, I could get very bitter about it, but
True.
I can't complain. I mean, I have that's been one of the great things of having my fingers in so many different pies that, I can kind of gravitate from one area to another area as I kind of need to, which has been good for me. So there are a lot of people doing a lot tougher than I am, and especially people who are, highly talented specialists, who rely on one particular kind of work and are not being able to kind of jump back and forwards as much as I do. So just at the beginning of the whole COVID thing in March, I was working on a show for a guy in New York, which was all visual effects, because I do a lot of visual effects work as well. So that was good for me, a remote thing happening in New York. I was getting paid doing my stuff here in my studio. So, I can't really complain too much about my situation personally.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as you in that I have my studio and I have client base for work and a diverse skill set. When I came to Seattle, I was a bit shocked coming from the San Francisco Bay Area, where everybody tended to be a yoga instructor, IT professional, and have a band all at the same time. When I came to Seattle, it was all about live music. Nobody I spoke to knew how to set up their pros to get their royalties. Just all the things I consider fundamental on running a record label or publishing as an artist. That are you submitting your set list so you can get your royalties through ASCAP or BMI? Yeah. And they were like, "What are those?" We just I play an instrument and I have a ton of shows booked and I'm playing all the time. How could I make more money and meet my medical expenses? Was what I got back, which was really surprising. So I did a whole lecture on music and money and how revenue streams work, and showing them the statistics of where money actually comes from. And so a few bands hired me on. They said, "Hey, we gotta understand how this all works." And a lot of other people were like, I'll just keep playing shows, I'm doing fine. And then boom, nothing. And all those people are in real hard times.
Yeah.
We had
and you have to do that too. I mean, these days you really need to be maximizing all your revenue streams wherever they're coming from, because they're like as not, they're just pennies, and you've got to get them all together, otherwise you're missing out. We all know what it's like trying to get any decent money out of Spotify or anything like that. So really the strategy has to be get them all working for you as much as you can.
All those revenue streams and all those mediums can be a universal adapter for artists that would otherwise be caught flat-footed.
Yeah.
That's well put, Joe. And gathering all the pennies together, I described during my presentation. It's like, hey, I just got a check for $500. Would you guys like to get a check for $500? Oh, it's because someone synced one of my songs to a YouTube video and it got 3 million plays. Yeah. So, that's not going to pay my rent, 3 million YouTube sync plays. But hey, it paid for maybe a new toy for the studio, several meals out at a restaurant. And you want to have a bunch of these things set up so that you like you say, you aggregate from a bunch of different sources. If you release a song, release the instrumental to a sync library. Yeah. So that you have the same product can go out but generate revenue from multiple sources and like you say, add up those pennies.
Yep, very important these days. It's one of the things I tell all my students, because I teach sound design, but I say to them, get lots of strings to your bow, because we just don't know where anything's going to go at the moment. Everything's in flux. We have a movie industry that is changing radically from what it once was. A lot more streaming content. Games are huge now. All the opportunities that you can find out there, you should go out and take them, because you just don't know where things are going to go, where your living is going to come from ultimately.
Games are a great example.
Yeah. There's a lot of working games too, and particularly for sound people. I mean, they have massive crews working on the sound, particularly, excuse me, some of those very large games, the large platformers and things. They employ a lot of people, and also differently to the movie industry, they employ a lot of people for a longer amount of time. So when you work on movies, particularly if you're working the sound side of things, you tend to go on to a movie and you might be on it for 3 months and that's it. But games will put on full crews for a couple of years because they need them for that amount of time. So there's a lot to be looked for in kind of alternate ways to sell your craft.
And games, I feel, really became the successor to films, music, and sports. Here where I was surprised a couple of years ago to learn that there were like the Olympics of gaming, where people were, winning gold medals in a gaming and getting sponsorships, just like the NASCAR. It's no longer just, some guy sitting at home in their pajamas playing a game. It's become huge, big business. And in some ways, all the virtual reality that starting in the 90s, we're told, virtual reality is going to take over cinema. And it never really happened. It's gaming where virtual reality has really gotten its big push.
Yeah, it's a massive industry. It's I'm not absolutely sure, but I'd say it's bigger than the film industry now. I would guess that it is.
Yeah, and the you now have games that are in whole series 1 through 8, like you said, and you may have the same composer going through this series of games. So I could see the retention would be longer.
Yeah, and a lot of music too. And I believe that the composers who write material for some of the big games actually do very well out of the ancillary stuff that they sell. The soundtracks and leasing the music out for all kinds of other purposes. The music is incredibly popular. I mean, people actually go out and buy game soundtracks. And I can understand it. It's very good music, a lot of it. You get some terrific pieces being written. So, yeah, it's a whole new thing.
I remember I was at several companies in the 90s that at 5 o'clock the company paused and we all played Quake and Quake 2 and these point shooters went. And there was at one point I realized, I said, this music's very familiar. I said, yeah, that's Nine Inch Nails in this version. And then the next version was like White Snake and all these bands that were getting in on that early on. Speaking of virtual worlds, I think a lot of your gallery work that I've seen online is very much about virtual worlds. So I would like to take people to a first example of a Peter Miller virtual world right now, and then we'll come back and talk about it. that was from Peter Miller's Points of Reference. So we were talking about games, video games, how video games have become an international sport, how video games have in some ways taken over from motion pictures and cinema. Virtual reality computer worlds now are happening within game environments. And those pieces remind me a lot of like Myst and HyperCard games, and there's adventure games where you travel through a landscape and encounter characters. How did that project get started?
So Points of Reference is really, you're right to actually draw those comparisons, because that was kind of one of the things that I had in mind when I was doing them. The idea that, you know, we do spend time in virtual spaces and that we are accustomed to certain kinds of things in virtual spaces. The pieces themselves are meant to be displayed on computer screens individually in a gallery space, and you're meant to kind of see them all together, and they all have, as you can see, they work around these ideas of neon signs having a message, and the idea that these messages and things that we see on signs are very familiar to us, but when you take them outside of their context, when you don't see them in a mall, or you don't see them in a queue somewhere, you see them in these strange alien concepts. They make you create your own little stories about why they are where they are. And that was the idea behind them. And we often see that. We're familiar with that kind of thing in gaming, because those kinds of removed perspectives are kind of fairly common in games. But the software that I use is the UNI software that you're very familiar with, and I've been working with this software for many years, over 2 decades now. I came into working with Artmatic when it was version 1, and at that time it was more or less an application which I think that Eric had created to make, so like many people of that time, excuse me, I just got to shut my cat up.
No, bring her on.
She's a noisy little thing. She just wants to be on my lap.
Hello. What's her name?
That's Rusty.
Hello, Rusty. Welcome to Sunday Live.
She's my studio cat. So yeah, at that time I was a Metasynth user. I'd actually used Metasynth for a few years before that. And as I recall, I mean, it's a bit back into the sort of mists of time now, but as I recall, Eric first created a little app to make images that Metasynth could use, because one of the things about Metasynth is that it can actually take an image and it can scroll across the pixels of an image to create sound. And of course, the best results for that kind of thing come from fairly geometric images where you've got repetition and you've got changes in gradients that are even and stuff like that. And I think that was why he first created that application, so that he could make simple patterned objects that you could use in Metasynth to create various sorts of sounds. And I started playing with it, and really quickly, I think one of the very first things that I said to him at the time was, wow, this is like a synthesizer. It's like a synthesizer for visuals, because you're working with these little operators. You can do things that we were very familiar with analog synthesis, where you can actually modulate something with something else. You can use filters like you can in synthesizers. You can use feedback like you can in synthesizers. And I thought, wow, it's like, it's really a graphic synthesizer. And so Eric kept writing a new code for Artmatic, and it became more and more complex and more wonderful. And I became absolutely obsessed with it. I was one of the big early adopters of it, I think, and I used it for all kinds of things. And then, you know, as a result of that, he started working on Voyager, which is the 3D app. And the things you see in Points of Reference are me trying to push Voyager and Artmatic to the limits that I could try at that time. So they're all created in Artmatic and also inside Voyager, I figured out some things I really wanted to do. I wanted to make neon signs, and I figured out a way of doing that. I think no one else had actually done anything like that before. I wanted to have something that was in reasonably high definition because, you know, to put it on to big screens, it has to be a reasonably high definition. But one of the difficult things with 3D apps, as I'm sure you know, is that the rendering times for doing things like that can be massive. You know, I have little Macs, so I don't really have render farms or anything like that. And so I designed a project that I could actually do with a series of animated still frames, which is what Points of Reference is. And I hope that when people see it, they if they find it sort of intriguing and mysterious, and it raises some questions about how we respond to being given information in the form of words in a sign, in particularly in this case in neon signs, and how we react to those things and when they're out of the context that we expect them to be in. So, and also the other interesting thing about Points of Reference too is that the sound is all binaural. It uses what they call head-related transfer functions to give you a fully binaural experience. So if you listen to them in headphones, you can actually feel the 3D environment of the sound as well.
They definitely, the sound, I listened to on headphones last night for the first time, and it is an immersive experience. I think in this particular, when you stream out like this, everything is crushed down into a mono stream out. So you guys didn't hear that, but if you have the opportunity, go over to Scribbletronics. We'll put the URL up a little later. Go over there and listen to them with headphones on the website, and you will get this surround sound environment. What struck me about them is so many people today are used to fast-paced, motion picture, television-driven. I have a background in gallery shows, and certainly have attended a lot of gallery shows and enjoy just being in a space and watching the piece evolve over time. My wife, she moves on to the next piece. She's off to the next painting or whatever. Sitting there for a 10-minute audio experience or a 10-minute visual experience is something that I recognize isn't for everyone. So when I looked at this piece, I was thinking about how to present it during the show, and I built that collage. And I realized I was imposing my story. I was starting to give it a beginning, middle, and end, a journey. And the power of these pieces, I would argue, is not to do that, but to actually just sit there in the gallery and experience that dissonance.
Yeah, that is exactly correct. With a great deal of my work, in fact, it's a fairly fundamental part of the work. It's the idea of being absorbed by something. You see the sign in Points of Reference, the one that says "wait here." It's a neon sign that's switching off and on, saying "wait here, wait here." It's nothing unless you can feel the weight of the time involved. Just sitting, looking at this sign, just saying this thing on and off for a period of time is really where the true gravity of the idea sort of sets in. And I have written about this before in some of the things that I've written, but I think that idea of time and the investment of time is something we're kind of losing now. We do expect that kind of instant gratification. We think, and I'm guilty of it as much as anybody else, we expect to sit down and see something and fully understand it straight away. And I really think that's a great loss. I've written music too, which uses basically the same kind of idea. I was commissioned to do some works for Qantas for their first class lounge in Sydney. And I wrote works that are designed to evolve over a very long period of time. I mean, over many hours. There are ways of experiencing that sort of work. I don't expect people are going to actually sit there for that amount of time, but they're designed so that you can transit through them. You can start at one point, you can go to another point, you might go somewhere else, but you come back through them again, which was ideal for where they were in the first class lounge. But I think we've sort of lost that kind of idea of having works that are expansive and and invest in the passing of time.
Well,
So it's something that I would say occurs in a lot of my work. Yeah, that idea that you need to actually understand that the time is a part of the process of experiencing the work.
Part of the journey.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking my favorite piece in a bar is in San Francisco, out by the Presidio. There's a Brian Eno piece that you look at it, it looks like a vaguely backlit geometric shape, and you don't see any motion. But as you start talking to someone, you look back, it's changed. And then you watch it, and it's just subtly shifting. So it's this continuous piece. And I love that because it makes you stop a moment, or it makes you check back in. And your work is in that category. And especially the ballroom scene made me think of David Lynch, especially the stuff that he did with The Return. His new Twin Peaks project, where he had action sequences and TV show sequences, but then he would go for 10 minutes just looking at a black and white shadow. And then I found out, doing a little background on him, that he was studied as a painter, and it all made sense. That idea of a still image that you can lose yourself in, and then to bring that towards animation or towards cinema.
Yeah, it's look, it's hard to express, I think, how important some of that stuff is. And if you spend time going to art galleries and art museums, as I like to do, you kind of get the feel for that. But I think it is one of those processes that you've got to indulge yourself in. You can't, you have to kind of say, I'm going to go and go to this art gallery, and I'm going to spend a few hours visiting things. We've kind of lost that, I think, in many ways with the kind of internet medium that we now have, where there's a lot of really high density information that comes at you all the time, and so you kind of get a little bit addicted to that sort of high density information, and you don't want to spend, or you find it harder to spend time with things that don't flood you with changing information all the time. And I miss it to a fairly high degree. I've got a very quiet place here where I live, and I actually really like silence. I like it being quiet. I don't like that kind of overwhelming amount of noise information. And I like to think that, some of the projects that I do with visuals kind of capture that as well. You're not being bombarded with a lot of things happening quickly, and not just visual things, but story things too. You're not being expected to keep up with something. You're able to kind of just go, I'll just stop for a minute, and I will just see what comes out of this. I don't need to try really hard to follow something here. I can just relax into it. I can actually just let it take me where it wants to take me without feeling the pressure to keep up,
It's a really great point. I brought up some pictures from the gallery show of Watching Europa, where one of the installations are these individual screens on the wall where you're watching, like you're looking into a fish tank. But the other image is people sitting in a stage, like a theatrical space with a large screen, and watching the images over time and that experience. I'd like to take the audience through a little taste. I'll give you like a 1-minute taste of what we're talking about here. And I do want to note that if you would like to have the full experience, that Peter is updating the Blu-ray, right? Or you have a Blu-ray available.
Yes, there's a Blu-ray version of this. I should say that, Watching Europa, again, is one of those experiences that's meant to happen. There are a few fundamental things about Watching Europa. It's a high definition visual piece. It's meant to be screened on 13 separate screens, and the images that appear are randomly, they kind of come together in a random way, because there's no actual formal linear pattern. The 13 screens play loops, and the loops are not synchronous, so they will always be playing something different. and the audio is all designed to work like that as well. So they all have different strands of audio on them. So that's the way it's meant to be seen. That image that you saw of people sitting in a cinema watching it, that was at the launch of Watching Europa, and I made what I call the maquette version of it, and that's the version that's on the Blu-ray, and that is a very linear experience by necessity, because every time you play it, it'll be exactly the same, but it was randomly put together when I did it, and the idea was that that's a way of expressing the experience without having to have 13 separate expensive screens. So that's how that's meant to be experienced. But it's the kind of experience that's meant to happen over a period of time. And it doesn't have, there's no demand on you to kind of keep up with anything. It's just about experiencing the situation as it happens.
Now I'm kind of torn now, because when I built an intro to it because I felt it might be too abstract for the audience watching the show, and I almost feel like now they need to just jump in and make the commitment. But I am going to give an intro. But consider, folks, if you've never had that experience of just sitting in a dark room and watching a piece of art come to life over time for an hour in your life, please, once we all get vaccinated and we can go back to galleries, do so. It's very hard in your home environment, your work environments, to step out. I know for years I worked in corporate environments where we were all rushing to yoga. And the whole point of yoga is to stop, right? To feel your breath and stop for a moment. Mm-hmm. And then we'd be like, oh, we gotta get to that first meeting after yoga. Mm-hmm. Like whatever we did for the last hours is gone. But same concept of stopping for a moment and not having something push at you. Another quick story before I start the intro is a friend of mine was trying to tell me why they were into trance music, this sort of techno trance. And I said, I don't get it. It just sounds like background noise. I don't understand not having lyrics and having a song. And she said, a song tells me what I should feel. Trance music is a soundtrack to how I'm already feeling. That was a good way of describing this kind of experiential art. Now, to give some sort of reflection of why this piece is named what it is, for folks who are not space fans like I have been all my life, I want to give you a brief introduction into our solar system. If you don't remember from school, our solar system involves the sun, which you see all the time, and a series of rocky and rocky with gas objects swirling around it. Here we are, Earth. As you go further for the sun, by the way, this is not to scale, you eventually get to Jupiter. And Jupiter has 4 large moons that were observed from Earth in the 1800s. And one of those is Europa. Now, once we sent a probe to photograph Europa, we just thought we'd see some rocky, icy, dead moons out in the outer solar system. But in fact, what we found around Jupiter is a lot of the pull and tension of a large body like Jupiter on a moon actually creates a lot of friction heat. And the innermost moon is volcanic and is actually the most volcanic place in the solar system, which is a little odd for being so far away from the sun. But the next planet out has a nice balance between that level of heat and the moons that are further out that are probably solid ice rock. And that's Europa. When you look at Europa, you don't see craters and impact. You see it's all been washed away, because this ice has been melting and pulled and tugged, and you see these lines and cracks through the surface, like giant ice flows above a body of water. So it's predicted that beneath that icy shell is in fact a worldwide ocean on Europa. And where there's an ocean and there's warmth, to our knowledge, there's always life. So the speculation is about being able to get into that ocean and seeing what's there. And Peter helps us imagine what that might be like. Watching Europa. that was some shots from the gallery show Watching Europa, which involves, Peter, how many, you said 13 screens?
13 screen, 53 separate animations.
And so as you're going through the gallery show, different screens are randomly pulling these different animations and putting them on screen?
Correct, yeah. And so, you would be experiencing not only the changing images, but you'd also be experiencing the changing sound field as well. Each of the 53 pieces has got its own individual soundtrack, and they are all tonally designed to work together. So you do get this. I've been able to actually put it up in certain ways to kind of replicate the experience, and much to my delight, it works perfectly. It's a very unusual and quite moving change in the soundscape as well. So, yeah. So the idea is, this is we know that there's an ocean on Europa. We know this because we can actually see that there's water erupting from cracks in the ice, which turns into vapor. And so therefore, we know something quite profound, and that is that the temperature under the ice is above zero, because otherwise it would be frozen. So that's interesting. That means the water is relatively, for our solar system, that's relatively warm. It's a warm place because the solar system gets very, very cold. And so the chances of there being life there are really quite high. We have absolutely no way of knowing what that life is likely to be. But we can speculate on certain things. We can speculate that, it's living in water, so we know that it must kind of have to obey certain kinds of physical rules. We can speculate from the deep ocean life on Earth that life has somehow found a source of light. So while we know that the ocean underneath Europa is going to be very, very dark, pitch black, in fact, because the light of the sun probably doesn't get there, or certainly doesn't get there, it's likely that if there was life, there will be some kind of bioluminescent light as well. And so I've kind of just riffed on those ideas with Watching Europa. The light sources, who knows what they are, but I figure that, we can make some guesses about certain kinds of things. And so you can see things that look familiar. They look a little bit like some kind of complex jellyfishes. There's some things that look a little bit like some kind of waving kelp, all the kinds of things that we know from the oceans here. But I'm not trying to really kind of go, well, this is, what life on Europa is going to look like. It's not at all about that. It's trying to capture the idea of wonder and amazement that we would have if we saw it. The idea that our first experience of it is, well, probably our only ever experience of it is going to be of some kind of remote viewing, where we have to send robots to experience it for us, and that we see it coming back as pictures. We would know nothing about it. We would have to speculate based on what we saw and what we heard as to what was going on, at least, in the first instances. So Watching Europa is really trying to capture that sort of sense of wonder and delight and amazement and mystery that we almost certainly would have if we found life under the ice caps of Europa.
I love your description of that in connection with the earlier gallery description of going into a space where there is mystery, where it's not about this monster coming at your screen with suckers and, being very prescriptive in its imagery or didactic in its narrative of, is it a friendly monster? Is it a bad monster? Stripping all that away and just having a sense of wonder and raw experience.
Yes. Yeah. And it would be like that. Even if there were monsters under the ice on Europa, we're so distantly removed from them that we can only really experience them from, the sense of the robots that we sent there. So it would be mysterious and strange, and there would be very little fear in that experience, because they couldn't really get us, but it's kind of really, it sort of goes deeper than that. It goes into this kind of idea of the wonder that kind of sits at the bottom of everything, and that is, in my mind, and this is something that I've actually learned from using Artmatic, this idea that there is this kind of deep mathematical structure that lies at the bottom of everything, including the life that we see. So when I'm working with those Artmatic systems, so there are that was a lot of time. That project took me maybe about 3 years to do, not just the animation, but kind of coming up with the right forms of math to do those things. I should explain that Artmatic actually uses maths. That it's a maths engine. It actually uses math as its basic kind of way of manipulating, the visual space. And I became very, very aware of how these mathematical systems, when I was using them, had this tendency to create things that look like life, look like some kind of organism. And I realized this is kind of deeply embedded in the maths, the idea that you're going to end up with these kinds of organic structures come from deep within inside the mathematical rules. And in fact, I did 2 shows before I actually, my very first still image show was a thing called Biologica, and that was one of my very first major works that I did with Artmatic, and that was flowers, and they were all mathematically generated. And that was when I first started getting this real sense for this deep relationship between life and the mathematical processes that come to bear on the universe.
Where do you fall in the argument that I've heard thrown out there of whether or not at this point we can assume that math is the universe versus humans invented math?
Yeah, that is a difficult one, and many people kind of talk about that. Well, we have no way of knowing whether we are independent of, the structure of the universe, because, of course, our whole experience of the universe is by necessity through the human experience. So we can't say, well, we exist independent of the maths of the universe because we are part of the maths of the universe. So did we invent mathematics? I don't think so, personally. I think the structure of the physics indicates that there's something of order that already exists there, and we've just kind of figured it out. But I can't. Who knows? I mean, that's a question for the philosophers.
I think it's I think you hit the nail on the head there, where any human beings have this uncanny ability to articulate describing the thing that they are within.
Yes.
And therefore, inherently, we can describe something that we cannot separate ourselves from. So in the end, it becomes the book Solaris. That feeling of something that you can't quite put your finger on. Which, a little side note for folks, if you saw the movie, the American movie Solaris, you didn't get a sense of what it's about. The Russian film gives you this sense of it, because much like your pieces, Peter, it requires you to dedicate this long amount of attention to watch things slowly unfold. And but the book is very much about that thing that, humanity is analyzing this thing to death, and their analysis starts becoming analysis of the analysis and gets them no closer to the actual thing. Yeah. And that's kind of the essence of the book.
It won't come as any surprise to you then that I'm a big fan of Stanislav Lem. I'm also a very big fan of Tarkovsky. So you can kind of see where my experiences have led me, that's for sure.
Seeing your work made me think not only that material, but our earlier conversation with the points of reference, with the tempo of words and using keywords in a new context. It makes me think of Brian Gysin, and of course William S. Burroughs is very famous for having learned from Brian Gysin the cut-up method of taking language and playing with it. So
Yeah.
you might say, go here, here, go,
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
here.
Well,
And there's these different permutations of one little nugget of language and how much you can fold and unfold that and give it new meaning.
Well, I also have a deep fascination with language as well. And if you've been to the site and you've seen some of the other artworks I've done, in my audio work, particularly in recent times, I've actually been working with a lot of language-based musical works. There's this wonderful source of public domain literary works. People read them. It's called LibriVox. So LibriVox actually takes all of this stuff that's in the public domain and allows people to read it, and then people read it, and they make, as part of the conditions of them reading it and putting it on LibriVox, they also have to agree that their readings will be part of the public domain, which of course is fantastic for someone like me, because I can dive in and take some of those recordings and reinterpret them. So, I've done a few things where I've actually taken all this public domain speaking and used the words. I love repetition. I love slowly evolving structures, and as you know, but also in music and in language as well. So all of that stuff ties into all my work. There's a lot of tie-ins that go across all of the visual work, all of the music and sound work as well. And I try to kind of keep some sort of stylistic thing going there, but it's difficult when my influences go so widely and my interests go so widely to kind of keep it all in one bundle,
I think you just described how my wife describes me.
Yeah, well, look,
Yeah,
what can I say?
I think
What
it's
can I say?
I think
I
it's
was going to say,
inherent.
what can I say? I'm in the COVID lockdown currently in Melbourne, and I'm not bored.
I keep saying that to friends. People are like, how are you holding up? I'm like,
Yeah,
fine. I'm not bored.
yeah,
I
yeah,
wake
never
up
bored.
morning, noon, and night, and
Never
there's
bored.
excitement in the universe to explore, and
Yeah,
sounds and music and visuals. And I'm also doing a big archive thing of my past that this show
right.
is somewhat a part of. And I got high videotapes back here to digitize. I don't have time to be bored.
I know. I haven't even got onto the chores part yet. I've got so many chores that I really should do. I told you the other day, I'm actually, Watching Europa is now, I think 2014 I did that. I have all the Watching Europa hard drives here, and I keep everything backed up. I'm pretty meticulous like that. But I decided I wanted to make sure that it would go into the future. So I've started upgrading it all to 4K, because originally it was just HD. And that's taken me a week just to get to where I am. And I keep discovering new things that I should do. I just realized that I'd made a classic, not a mistake, but I'd done it wrongly. And so I have to go back and do everything again, because there's actually a better solution to the way I did it. But I want to, it's important to me to have this stuff, because, I don't know where it's going to go. I've never managed so far to get the actual exhibition of Watching Europa in the format that I want it. That's still a potential future thing. And of course, as the technology gets better, we expect to see better results. So I kind of need to keep up with that as much as I possibly can. There'll come a point where, when we're into, I don't know what, 20K image or something where it will not look so good anymore, but it looks magnificent in 4K. I mean, and that's really all I care about right at the moment. And the technology's made it more achievable now too than it used to be, because we have these wonderful new 4K streaming things, as I told you the other day, and that's great. That means that it's easier to mount that exhibition now.
The technology that we've gone through as artists in our lifetime, for folks that don't know what 4K is, it's a high definition video format. So a lot of the newer televisions, think of it as VHS goes to DVD, goes to Blu-ray, goes to 4K. Well, it's not an accurate description, but something along the line. Just imagine crisper and clearer video. That requires more and more data. And the more and more data requires more and more storage, and it requires more and more computer time and power to generate. So as an artist, both with me with the music, where I used to put out stuff on cassette tape, and then I got, a DAT machine, and, going up in that quality, you go back to those old masters and you're like, oh my God, this does not hold up. And so you're always thinking about, how can I take that material and, like you said, future proof it, so when the new platform comes, the content can continue being available for the technology. And if you're waiting for a particular gallery show, photography people will keep all their negatives, their old negative slides and whatnot, nice in shape, so they can do a higher level scan for that future gallery show that's going to have that as a requirement. And in video, it's daunting to to be in that space and keep the work up to that quality factor.
Sure. And as you know, as being an artist that kind of works with technical stuff, as I am, there's a certain imposition on you that doesn't really exist for let's say a person doing pencil sketches, where you need to kind of keep your head on the technology all the time. I can't afford to have someone to wrangle all my technology, so I have to actually know what it's doing, and that becomes more and more complex as we kind of go further into the future. So understanding things like, how video codecs, compression codecs work, and understanding how bit rates for audio work, and all that kind of stuff, which you sort of need to if you're a solo artist like I am. And that takes a lot of your time as well, just understanding that stuff and trying to future-proof. Future-proofing that's riddled with problems, because you can't really tell, whoever thought. I remember seeing the first examples of QuickTime, these tiny little postage stamp size pixelated things, and thinking, oh my God, is that what the future is? Is that what we're going to be looking at? But you look at QuickTime now, the amazing 4K, unbelievably high resolution images. Just recently, I was involved with the restoration of a feature film that we made. When I came out of film school, I had my company at that time with Alex Proyas, and we made a feature film at that time. And we just restored it just a couple of years back, and restored it for a new release. And the thing that occurred to me as we were working through this, and we were starting to see the image that was coming back, was, we never saw it like this when we made it. It's better now than when we made it, because the things you can do to make the image look so much cleaner and crisper. We shot it on film. One of the things that we had on film that people don't even know about now is that when you project film, particularly it was shot on 16mm film, is a thing called float, where the image actually moves around inside the film gate. And whenever you saw a projected film, you just were accustomed to seeing float. And whenever you do a telecine version back in those days, it had the float on it. Well, of course, float doesn't even exist anymore. There's no such thing. It doesn't happen. So when we restored the film, we took all the float out of it and made it as steady as a rock. So we're seeing it how we could only have imagined back in those days. The technology has now allowed us to see it in a way we'd never have ever been able to see it when we made it. And that's phenomenal. That's just incredible. We live in an age of miracles.
Certainly.
And a new appreciation for what you've created earlier.
Say that again, Joe?
You a second time around, you have a new appreciation for what you've created earlier. It's recreated time.
Yes, absolutely, and quite a joyful experience too, because you're seeing material that you had created at that time, and you're able to kind of bring it into a much better realization of what it was. So it's actually, it was so great to be able to do that, and not just the music, and not just the image, but the music, because I wrote the music for that particular film, and being able to remaster that in a really high level of quality as well. It was really fantastic. It was, very few experiences like being able to take your old work and kind of brush it up so good that it looks amazing, better than it did.
It's these very reasons that classic films will never die, nor should they be remade.
Right. Well, speaking of Tarkovsky, I just recently bought there's been a restoration of Stalker, one of his famous films, and I'd never seen it like I've seen it now with the restoration. You know, I remember seeing it in a rep cinema when I was maybe in my 20s back in the day, and that was a film print. You know, dark, gloomy, you know, third-hand Russian print. You know, whatever. Now they've re-released it and it looks astonishing, and you just kind of look at it and think, oh, so that's what it should have looked like. And we have that opportunity to see that stuff now. You know, it's so the whole world of older cinema has become refreshed for us all. You know, and I'm sure you've seen some of the beautiful restorations of old black and white movies that are being done now, where they just look astonishingly beautiful.
I joke that I was born at the wrong time, because I should have been born earlier to make everything on film, or later so I had the technology to take that film and make these great restorations. But instead I landed right in the middle of the video era. So I have stacks of what was called High 8, and High 8 was, that's the new thing, is high quality. And it was crap. The tapes would break, the signal would scramble, every problem it was worse. And that by spec it was greater than VHS, but I would say that from a stability standpoint of using High 8 technology during the 90s, it was far worse. It just did not hold up. Mini DV, surprisingly, has held up pretty well when I've digitized those tapes, but the High 8s are terrible.
It's not bad. Yeah. Well, we're in another weird situation now, as I'm sure you know, where things change so much that we're not just talking about the medium that you use. So you may have, you know, files, and this happened to me just two or 3 days ago. I was searching back for a document that I needed, and I realized that it was actually written in the old Apple ClarisWorks format. So not only do we need to worry about the medium, we need to worry about the applications that create the medium and the hardware that the medium is created upon. So as a consequence, I now have 2 or 3 old Macs running I have a Mac running, you know, the old OS 9, which is kind of the last Power Mac operating system, because I have about 3 pieces of software that won't run on anything else and have not been updated. So, you know, we start to wander into that problem now. We need to keep our gadgets as well, because we may not be able to play anything in the future.
I kept for many years a whole string of computers. And I know I've been to Eric's apartment in Paris, and you know, he's got every single Mac that he ever purchased there in a row. I've got it down to where I just have a G5 quad Power PC, and then I have a Windows XP machine, and then I have a Windows 10 machine, and an Intel Mac. And I've got it down to those 4 machines, but for a long time, like you said, I had to have my OS 9 machine, my Power PC, you know, all these variants. For these platforms, it's very similar to the idea of this camera. I have a Super 8 camera, I have an 8mm camera, I have a 16mm camera. Except these, you know, these boxes are sometimes bigger than those cameras. But it's that same idea of having to maintain the platform that the technology sits on, that your particular medium sits on. And I'm reminded of the gentleman who remastered George Harrison's All Things Must Pass. He thought he was going to go into some freezer locked vault where the master tapes were stored. And he said, George led him downstairs and said, there's the master tapes for this famous album. And he said it was just a pile of reels, like unreeled, half on the floor and just sitting there on a table. You know, it's amazing that we have what we have. And as a listener, you don't think about all the technology, layers of technology that goes into that experience of that song or that visual. And
then the other thing we can't tell, of course, is, you know, how important any particular thing is to the future. So, you know, he's done his record of All Things Must Pass, and it's been created as, you know, presumably it was a vinyl record when it first was released, and maybe they kept the master tapes for it somewhere, but you know, it's transitioned beyond that now. It's a classic album. We may need to do things with it to actually preserve it, you know, and you tend not to think of that at the time. It's not something you kind of think, I'm creating something that's actually going to be a classic piece of history for the future. I don't think like that, you know. I'm just creating the work I'm doing. So you obviously try and make it as resilient as you possibly can, but it's really impossible to know how that's going to go. I mean, I look around my studio and I think, you know, I've got many masters of many things that I've done. If there was a fire here and it burnt down, that would be it. You know, I keep copies of some stuff elsewhere, but I certainly couldn't copy everything. You know, that's somewhat daunting. You think, oh, that would be the end of it. That would be, I just start again, I guess.
I'm pretty much an archivist. So every little thing that gets created, I try to archive as best as possible. And still then, it's been a very daunting journey. About 7 years ago, I had gotten 2 4-terabyte RAID striped redundant drives. Like, okay, this is it, right? My work's no longer on a bunch of floppies and jazz drives and single hard drives. This is going to be so much safer. And it actually turned out to be far worse. And all of the 8 drives inside, 7 of them on 2 different network servers failed the same day. And were unrecoverable. And I had to go back all to the jazz drives and the smaller hard drives that I'd stacked like cores of wood. Otherwise, my entire recording history would have been gone.
Yeah, well, it's lucky you kept them.
Yeah,
that's the other thing too. I've got really weird things. Like, you know, I did a bunch of my early. I still have my Kurzweil. It's somewhere sitting under the table. I did a bunch of recordings, and I have boxes and boxes and boxes of drives for these recordings. But my Kurzweil was connected to a SCSI drive. I don't know whether you remember SCSI.
Oh yes.
I don't have those SCSI drives, so I got all these removable Cyclist drives that I could never run them on anything because I don't have any drives. I'd have to go out and try and find someone with an old Cyclist removable.
Yeah,
that would be fun.
I finally got rid of the jazz
where
drive
technicians become
2 years
historians.
What are you saying, Joe?
It's where technicians become historians with their older technology.
Yeah.
I think that's the reality with artists, that we're being an artist in the sense of absorbing new information or ideas, processing those ideas, generating an output. At the same time, we have to be archivists, maintaining all this technology that this work was created on. And so we're like a historian of our own work. We're an IT department of our own work. And that all takes additional time that we're actually not being an artist, not, you know, just getting a canvas out today and painting.
Yeah.
How many versions of the White Album do we have?
I once visited Hans Zimmer in his place down on can't remember where it is now, down on the beach. Forgotten the place where it is in LA now. And Hans has kind of got this kind of enviable situation where he basically just kind of rocks into his room and he's got this whole army of people who look after everything. And I thought to myself, oh my God, I would love that, you know, so I can just actually sit down at my computer and my keyboards and I can just do my stuff and then walk out at the end of the day and someone else just takes care of all of that peripheral thinking that I have to do.
Oh man, that's my dream. That's my dream. I quite often, I don't know if you get this, Peter, quite often people will describe me as the IT guy. No matter what I'm doing, I could be doing sales, I could be doing corporate training, and oh yeah, you're that IT guy. And I've never worked in IT in my life, but maintaining the work and the files and the archives, it's required me to be that. So and people will say to me, oh, you love technology so much. I say, I hate technology. Ask my wife how much cursing goes on when I work with technology. but it's
It's a means to
a
it's a
must.
means to an end. We love being able to do what we do, but we tolerate the technology side of it because it enables us to do that. But it's not. I'm good with the technology, but I don't love it. I would rather not have to think about it. I'd rather not have to think about, oh my God, now I've got to have like a computer running Catalina and I've got to keep my other computers running Mojave because there's going to be something that won't work under one or the other of them. I mean, how annoying is that? I don't want to have to think about it. I just want to do the work, but you don't have that option if you're a solo person trying to create stuff and you don't have money. That's your lot basically.
Yeah. You have to learn it yourself. I'm throwing out to the chat room. See if they've been a little quiet this week. So I want to see if there's anybody over there that has questions
I've
for
bored
Peter.
them all to death.
We've talked about music, technology, gallery shows, and seen some videos of Peter's work. We are over time. And normally we wrap up and go into after party after the hour, but I got too much in the conversation. It was like 20 minutes went by. And so I think we're going to skip after party this time, put out for questions. And I don't see any on Facebook. Looking at the restream.
So much for John Worthington's tough questions then.
Yeah, I saw him. I thought I saw him join the chat. Let's see here what Restream says. I could swear I saw him earlier. Oh, there he is. Yeah, John Worthington. Yay, QuickTime, John says.
Yay, QuickTime. QuickTime is a miracle. It really is a miracle.
QuickTime is not a dead platform?
Not so far.
I know on Windows they stopped making it.
I don't know what will happen when they go across into the ARM processors, whether they'll revisit it. But basically the codecs that they're using are all based on QuickTime. So that new HEVC one that I was telling you about that I'm using now to crush stuff down. That's one of the codecs that comes now with compressor. So they're all basically all built on the QuickTime engine, I imagine.
I'm seeing John is perked up, and he says he's being kind.
He's always kind. He's a kind man.
Hey, John. You have any thoughts about the technology and art and that intersection of having to maintain all these versions, all these Macs and machines? He's championing QuickTime as well. QuickTime is at the heart of all the MPEG-4 technology as well.
Yeah.
And it was. I know Eric was getting a little worried there because they were like, okay, QuickTime Pro is done. And then on Windows, they stopped releasing QuickTime, new versions, only like minor updates. So it was, and a lot of, the video rendering and output that he uses, he relies on QuickTime to do that.
Mm.
So it looks like John says it's not dead.
Yeah, I imagine that the player has changed an awful lot, and they've removed a lot of the functionality from the original player, which is sort of annoying, to make it, I don't know, more streamlined or something. And so some things that we used to be able to do under the older versions of QuickTime, like kind of rudimentary editing and outputting single frames and all kinds of things they took out of QuickTime for the last versions, which is a shame. But, the actual application is always going to exist in some sort of form or other, because really it's the only way on Mac platforms anyway, to play video at the moment. Well, not the only way, but, it's the most expedient way. You don't want to have to now, it's because they've taken out some things out of the QuickTime functionality. To do certain things now, you have to have an editing app like Final Cut Pro or one of those things to do that, which is kind of annoying. One of the things you used to be able to do from the old versions of QuickTime was actually assemble a numbered sequence of still images into a movie. Well, the newest versions of QuickTime don't do that any longer, which is a great shame. So if you want to do that, you've got to do it a different way. I know Eric was saying that he's using a new app, which I've forgotten the name of, vQuartz, to assemble
Yes.
strings of still images. I still have an old version of QuickTime Pro that I think it's version 7 that I use to do that now, because it's just so fast. Like it does it in an instant. You can do it in Final Cut, but it's actually a real pain in the ass. QuickTime just does it as part of what it used to do, and it's a shame they kind of moved those things out of it, because they were part of the real value of that app.
I agreed. I used it for so many things. Hold on a moment. I'm going to challenge John with something. Join the Zoom, John. Except Facebook wants to make him John Morgan. I don't know why that's the case. Come on. It's funny. Facebook is really finicky about names. And John probably hasn't friended me, so it won't allow me to target him. But if I... But then if I use the @ sign, then okay, good. Yeah, I completely agree. And that's why I felt like QuickTime had died out. I'd been a QuickTime Pro owner for years, and I used it to do all my conversions, like between AIFF and WAVE, and render my MP3s and everything. Oh, John accepted the challenge. Ha ha. Yeah, it's coming up.
Hey!
Hey, John.
Hey.
How you doing?
So QuickTime, you're letting me know QuickTime is still king, and even with the feature reductions, do you know any rumors about where this is going to go with ARM, and whether or not they're going to build out QuickTime more, or they're just going to treat it as a player?
How's it going?
Going good. Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining in. We're in sort of what I call after party here. I'll show the slide. We didn't quite get to Mystic Moment this time. So if I want to talk about a Mystic Moment before we get talking about QuickTime, just to let everybody know, join communities. John here, Joe, Peter, I met them all because I joined communities and was interacting and helping those communities out with, creative work, whether it be music, art, historical reenactment, and that's how I met all these guys. If you're feeling isolated during COVID-19, find some online communities to join, and both John and Peter have donated time to a friend of ours, Eric, the software that made Watching Europa, to help him test it, because he's a one-man shop, so he needs friends to help out. You help out, and then you meet other people, and that connects to other people, and that's what led Peter to being on the show here today. So having said all that, that's my Mystic Moment where I give advice each week.
That's good advice. I like that advice.
Yeah,
I make the observation that, we're actually very fortunate that we have this way of communicating at this point in time, because imagine how crummy this whole thing would be if we couldn't do this. We'd be all so isolated. Right at the moment, this is really, we're in lockdown. I'm only allowed to go out for 4 basic reasons. I can go out and get some groceries. I can go out to exercise. I can go out if I have to for my job, and I can go out for medical reasons. That's it. So, I can't go out to see friends. I'll be kind of screwed. if it wasn't for this wonderful invention that we have, which allows us to all be connected to one another.
Message in a bottle,
Yeah.
right here.
I just want to loop back to something on image sequences that Peter was talking about. There's a fine Australian product called DaVinci Resolve.
Yes, indeed.
It does a brilliant job of importing image sequences.
Oh, it doesn't. I've never used it for that. I actually have it, and I use it for all kinds of other things, but I've never actually thought of doing that. Final Cut's awful. Final Cut's awful at it. It brings in all the media, but it makes it kind of like it's so slow to knit all the things together, and then it keeps on having trouble when you want to play. You actually have to render it out as a movie to re-import it before it'll actually play properly.
Yeah, I've completely gotten rid of Final Cut at this point in favor of Resolve. And actually Resolve has the opposite problem in some respects, because if you open up a folder that has a numbered sequence in it, it assumes it's an image sequence
right.
and compiles it into a clip, and you have to go through some extra steps to say, no, I really want the individual files.
Right. I'll have to look at that then, because I do it all the time. That's my kind of standard way of rendering out both Artmatic and Voyager now. I always do it as image sequences, mostly because where we live, I'm in a sort of an outer suburban area, and we've got a lovely place, but the problem is that where we are frequently has power outages. I still don't understand how in a modern city that can happen, but it does. So one of the reasons that I've gotten into the habit of doing it is if I do an overnight render, I don't want to get up in the morning and find that it just didn't do anything because the power went out in the middle of the night. So that's how I do it most of the time. I'm really glad you gave me that tip, because I'll look straight into that when we finish.
Well, you remember you mentioned the first version of Artmatic, and that it rendered out image sequences, and they used to be huge.
Yeah.
Because Eric was rendering uncompressed image sequences.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
And I actually ended up helping him with the QuickTime stuff.
Right.
Because I kept filling up my hard drives trying to render out movies in Artmatic.
Right.
And we'd go back and forth. He was living in San Francisco at that point in time. About, you should just do this. It's not that hard, Eric.
Yeah.
No, I've got other stuff on my list. So we finally spent a very long weekend in his San Francisco apartment coding.
Yeah, I dread to think of what it'd be like trying to do it now if it was like so massive, because so we're now up at I'm starting to work for various projects in 4K, and that makes for very, very big stretches of image. So it would be a nightmare.
I'm bringing up Worlds of Artmatic, which is the Facebook group that we're all a part of. So folks have a sense of what this software is and can do. A lot of landscapes, worlds, science fiction themes, but also abstract art. I think that Artmatic still, I would say, even though the package with Designer and Voyager can do all these other things, I'd still say the majority of people are creating abstract art with it.
Yeah, you can. We've had discussions over the years about Artmatic and its capabilities, and the thing about it is that it's capable of doing like extraordinary things if you really master it and you understand what it is and how it works. But it has a dual kind of aspect to it. And that is that most people who get into Artmatic, and I was no different, I was exactly the same, because Eric has done this incredible implementation, what we call the Zen effect, or the Zen moment, and that is that you can get into Artmatic and you can actually use it to create things kind of almost autonomously. You can click a dice, it rolls the dice and it creates all kinds of things. And it's a wonderful way of exploring the potential of Artmatic. But the side effect of that is that many people don't go beyond that because they're daunted by what they perceive to be the complexity of the other side of it, which is building your own environments inside it. But it's not, I mean, I am no mathematician, and I've learnt a lot about math while I've been using Artmatic, but it's not that hard, particularly, I think, if you're a musician, because a lot of the interface to me and a lot of the way things worked to me was really similar to old analog synthesis methods. So when I was doing analog synthesis, I had to learn all of that stuff, all of the kind of the way filters work and the way modulation works. And a lot of that kind of easily adapts across to Artmatic. And so it's just about the slow process. And I think everyone tries to bite off really big chunks of Artmatic when they really should just be doing it very, very slowly. And I've done a few tutorials where I, said, look, let's just build something really simple, because building something really simple will teach you a lot more about Artmatic than trying to jump into the deep end and do something really complex, which will just scare the pants off you, But it's a phenomenally powerful thing. And although, you can create wonderful abstraction, as I've shown, you can make human faces to a fairly reasonable degree of reality. And it's not that kind of app. I mean, you wouldn't set about using it to make faces, but you can if you really want to.
And this is something that I think we can all agree that Eric's approach to software is different, because rather than developing a product and then saying, okay, this is a product for manipulating photographs, this is a product for creating 3D landscapes, this is a product for doing X. The reality is he's an artist first. And as an artist, he explores through programming he explores through programming, and art comes out as a result of that. And as that develops over time, then he develops an application around those explorations. So you end up with these products that are not niche specific market. They're all over the place. You want to make music, you can make music with Designer. If you want to do the visual that I'm showing right now that's abstract, do that with Designer. It's the Swiss Army knife that comes out of artistic exploration that results in the software application. So it can be quite daunting to approach this software and say, well, what am I going to do with this tool? It's not telling me I'm going to make your photographs better. It's not telling me I'm your video editor. It is this thing that you need to jump into and explore and see what happens. I remember back at the San Francisco apartment when he was first coding Artmatic, as Peter was mentioning, to create some images for Metasynth. And he just created this generator app, and he was just pushing this button. There was just a dice at the time. And he was hitting this, and he kept hitting this dice, and he would catch his breath. I go, look at that, look at that. I said, it's very interesting, Eric. And he goes, I don't know how it's doing that. And I wrote it.
Yeah. I completely identify with that, because, and that's what I was saying to you about the kind of organic stuff that's fascinating that comes out of, the process that I made watching Europa, because I've been in that situation with Artmatic where I'll create something, and whilst I understand pretty well now what's going on in the system, so I'm looking at this system, I designed this system, I know what I intend it to do, and then I'll be doing something and I'll change one parameter and I'll just go, that's amazing. Where did that come from? And then I have to really think hard about, well, okay, I can see why that, right, I can see why that's doing that now. But it's just like this sudden emergence of some, incredible complexity and beauty that's somehow there in the maths. It's just about you kind of getting the maths into, and I always use my hands when I'm describing this, because it's like sculpting to me. It's really like sculpting. You just, you've got to pull that parameter down a bit and you push that one up a bit and you've got to twist that one around a bit, it's just like that. And particularly, and I should do a little, I'm thinking of doing some kind of like, interactive thing like we're doing now with, just to go into some of the fractal worlds with Voyager, because they are very much like that. You do these tiny little tweaks, and sometimes you're talking about the smallest numerical entry you can make to create very, very, very profound changes in the fractal. And it can be the difference between total garbage and the most beautiful structure you've ever seen. And to know where to look for that stuff in those systems is incredibly important. Otherwise you get very frustrated and you just think it's just making rubbish all the time. But it's really hard to kind of write it down, because it's a very intuitive thing. So I figured that really the only way I could actually do that is if I try to open up a session like this and said, well, here's the process and this is what I'm doing. Ask questions, and I'll try and explain why they're doing what they're doing.
Now, I'm showing a little bit of a video. This looks like it's yours, Peters, on the Worlds of Artmatic. This is the ossuary.
Yeah, the ossuary. That's a recent thing that I just made. I've been rendering that out at HD quality. That's a really interesting thing, because many of the Voyager systems are actually so render intensive that trying to make movies is pretty frustrating at any decent resolution. But here's the weird thing, that fractal renders really fast. I have no idea why, because it's such a complex piece of work. You go into that fractal and look at it, it's got 12 levels of iteration in the fractal, but it still renders out fast enough to get you like 30 or 40 seconds of HD overnight. And that's fast. That's faster than the Watching Europa systems, in fact, which were just Artmatic. So you can get some pretty amazing things in Voyager if you kind of dive into the right places. So that's a fractal that I designed about 5 years ago. I just revisited it with CTX to see how it played, and then I realized, hey, wait a minute, this actually renders really fast.
Well, so here's a harder question for you. Taking something like Watching Europa, what would you do that differently now with CTX? Because I find with some of my things that if I try to take older pieces and move them over, especially stuff from back old versions of Artmatic that you can't automatically import the system, it's really hard to get the same effects. And sometimes I'll look at something, I'll go, oh, well, I wouldn't have done that anywhere near that way in the current software.
Yeah, there are two aspects to that. One is that because the transition to CTX and the 64-bit, Eric has changed some things, particularly the mixers. I found that a number of the mixers work differently to the way they used to work. And for me, that's fundamentally problematic, because I use mixers a lot. So I'm talking about the mix components, the ones where you take one stream of RGB and you mix it with another stream of RGB using the compacted RGB streams. So that's problematic, and some of them I can't really easily solve. Some of them I have, but I look into some of them and I honestly don't understand well enough what Eric has done to be able to actually rebuild them. So those things, I don't know how I would. I know this because I've gone through all the ITBLs to try and figure out, can I make an updated version? And really, to be truthful, about half of them I can't work out why they render differently now. I would like to do that, but that's difficult. But the other aspect of that is, would I do Watching Europa differently? No. And in fact, the Europa stuff doesn't really, it doesn't transition very well into CTX, again, because I used a lot of color mixes in there. But I'd have to do them in the same basic process because of the design of what I've done with them. They're actually iterated looped systems, but they run through, I don't know whether you're familiar with the space comparison things that I've been doing, where it looks sort of like something's being refracted. The bottom level of the tree is being pulled through a space comparison, and the space comparison offsets the image displacement, and it gives you those kinds of ideas that to our eyes look like it's refraction. In watching Europa, you can't really see it as refraction because there's nothing for your eye to grab onto. So if there were lines in the background, you could kind of see that that's what's going on. But I purposefully didn't do that because I just really wanted them to look like jellyfish kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So to run through that process again, I would do the design in exactly the same way. The only things that would be different would be the implementation of the mixes in CTX, because they work somewhat differently.
That's a great question, and I think probably at this point we're more in a sort of a you and I software online discussion, which is fine. This is my 15th episode, so the show is still evolving. And my mom, who's chiming in, she's been telling me, you need to play more of your songs, got to entertain your, and I'm trying to feel my way of what I want this show to be. First, I thought it would be a variety show, and the technology was so crazy and latency problems, I kind of gave up the online concert thing. And it evolved more into an interview show where I interviewed people whose work influenced my live stuff, and then I'd play my live stuff. And now it's transitioning fully into interviewing artists and musicians and poets, which I put Joe in that box, who create interesting work and think about them and want to have a discussion about that work. And I'm thinking that one of the things I've had on my list for 2 years now is to do a monthly you and I Zoom session where we all get on video.
I think that's a great idea. Yeah.
And I was
about I'm somewhat frustrated by the you and I thing. So we have, we're trying to consolidate everything at the moment, so it's all kind of in one place, and it looks like that one place is going to be Facebook. But of course, you get people on some of the other lists who go, why Facebook? Because Facebook is the evil empire and all that kind of stuff. And sure, I mean, it's problematic, but the thing is, Facebook is really quite a perfect place for the sort of thing we do, because it's a discussion and it's images and it's movies, and you can tie the whole thing in together, and it works quite well for that sort of thing. But what is somewhat frustrating for me is that I look at something like the wiki that you posted up this morning and think, wow, you know what, there's so much great stuff in that wiki. And people do, if you can get someone to actually go and look at it, and they'll come back and say, oh, well, I didn't know you could do that. Oh, wow, I was trying to do that. And you kind of go, yeah, it's all there. Just go and look at it. It's fantastic. So I find it somewhat frustrating, because I really, I see people doing stuff, and I think to myself, and they say, where's the manual? Why are there video tutorials? All this kind of stuff. And I really want to be able to help people in some way to maximize their experience in the applications, because I'm going to be like an evangelist, particularly for Artmatic, because I think Artmatic is one of the most unique and most amazing pieces of software that exists anywhere. And I would love people to become more familiar with it and have a much more close relationship with the way that it works, rather than just seeing lots and lots of abstract kind of images, which is great, but it's just so much more than that.
Yeah, I agree. Once I realized the problem is you can't get people to read. It opened up the world to me. Oh, I was just saying, once I realized it was a modular synthesizer and I had that metaphor, it suddenly made sense to me, where before it was like, I was hitting a wall.
Yeah, absolutely. And the problem is that, we write the wiki, but people don't read. I've done bunches of tutorials, but trying to get a method for getting people to go to them is difficult. And I think one of the other things is that you do things in your own particular way, but what will be really useful is to be able to do something like this where you're actually explaining something and then have people be able to ask questions, where they'll say, yeah, what did you just do then? I didn't understand that bit. You went too fast. Or, could I change that in some way to make it work in this way? That you want to be able to respond to those kinds of questions. So I fully endorse that idea. We should have like some kind of regular discussion where we can just talk about stuff.
When do you think anybody still watching the show? We've gone down the rabbit hole of some software I'm helping a friend of mine market, and John and Peter are longtime users of the application. So we're discussing having an online Zoom. So I would just consider, if you don't want to hear us talk about that, you guys, be willing to stay on Zoom a moment. I'm going to go ahead and conclude this week's episode of Sunday Live, and then we can talk about this UNI software piece.
Sure.
So, folks, if you want to see more about Peter Miller's work, there is an interview from September that you can look up on YouTube. If you'd like to see more of my work, you can find my music in my 3 bands, caleb.bandcamp.com, audioterrace.bandcamp.com, quiblue@bandcamp.com, and my various YouTube channels related to that. I want to thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of Sunday Live, and see you next week, 5 to 6 p.m. every week. All right, that's as much as the outro music as you folks get. We're now going to go back to the discussion with Peter, John, and Joe, who's been strangely quiet during this session, but he did come from a very long motorcycle ride. And Joe, do you have any access to a Macintosh, or do you just have a Windows machine?
Access to what now?
A Macintosh computer?
The closest I have to a Macintosh computer is the iPhone 8 that's sitting to my left at this point.
All right, cool.
I'm those dyed-in-the-wool Windows person. My Mac experience has been limited. I've leaned toward Windows because of the fact that it's